I was sitting at a red light last Tuesday, just a normal afternoon, when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a simple notification, a subscription renewal for some software I use for work. It wasn't a large amount, maybe $40 or $50, but in that split second before I even looked at the screen, I felt that familiar micro freeze in my chest. It's that tiny, involuntary prayer we say without realizing it. Please don't be a problem. And then it hits you. It's never really about the $40. It's about the instant, high-speed mental math that follows. Your brain starts scanning the next 2 weeks. Rent auto pay. The deductible for that dental cleaning. The fluctuating price of filling the tank. The groceries you need for Thursday. You aren't reacting to a bill. You're reacting to the lack of space. Most people I talk to think they're bad with money, or that they just need a massive raise to. Stop feeling this way. But I've realized the stress isn't a symptom of your income. It's a symptom of your architecture. When you live without a buffer, your life is essentially a long hallway with no doors. You just have to keep walking, hoping nothing blocks the path, because you have nowhere to step aside. But what if there's a specific point where that background noise, that constant, low-frequency hum of calculation, actually quiets down? I'm not talking about being rich. I'm not talking about a lifestyle. I'm talking about a psychological threshold where your brain actually switches modes. Imagine two people. They have the exact same job, live in the same American suburb, and deal with the same rising healthcare premiums. One of them sees that phone notification and feels their pulse quicken. The other sees it, barely registers the amount, and goes back to thinking about what they want for dinner. The difference isn't their character or their hustle. The difference is a boring, uncelebrated amount of cash sitting in a place they don't touch. There is a surprisingly low number where this shift happens. It's not get-rich money. It won't make you famous, and it won't change what you see when you look in the mirror. But it fundamentally changes how you move through a Tuesday afternoon. It turns money from a predatory threat that's always hunting you into a dull, functional tool that just sits in the shed until you need it. The real shift isn't actually the cash itself. It's that as you build this margin, your identity begins to change. You stop being someone who is constantly dodging obstacles and start being someone who can afford to pause. Once you cross this line, life doesn't necessarily get easier, but it gets much, much quieter. And that quiet changes everything. My name is Jim, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to glide through financial challenges, while others are constantly stressed about their bank account balance. If you've ever wondered what it actually feels like to have different amounts of money saved up, and more importantly, how each milestone changes your decision-making process, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps clarify things for you. The financial air gap. We've been conditioned to believe that money is a ladder, that for every rung you climb, you feel a little more successful, a little more up there. But your nervous system doesn't care about ladders. It doesn't actually need abundance to function correctly. It doesn't need a 7-figure portfolio or a house that makes people jealous. It needs predictability. There is a specific threshold, a financial air gap, that has nothing to do with your status or your lifestyle. It's a structural buffer that exists between your skin and the friction of the world. Most of us dramatically overestimate how much money it takes to feel fundamentally safer. We think we need to reach the horizon, when we really just need enough space to breathe without checking our pulse. Your brain begins to relax the moment it knows that a mistake, a late fee, a miscalculation, a bad week, is no longer fatal. This isn't about being rich. It's about the qualitative shift that happens when you stop living in a state of constant, high-alert fragility. It's the difference between driving a car with a working brake pedal and one where you're just hoping the road stays flat. The vigilance of the edge. Before you cross that threshold, you aren't just managing money. You're managing your own survival instincts. Most of us are operating in a state of constant background vigilance that we've mistaken for the normal weight of being an adult. It's a specific kind of mental exhaustion. You aren't just grocery shopping. You're timing the checkout line around the exact moment your direct deposit hits. You aren't just driving to work. You're letting that rattling sound in the dashboard slide because, honestly, the car is fine for now. And you can't afford the mental or financial load of a mechanic telling you it's a $900 fix. Every decision is framed through a single, exhausting question. Can I survive this? This is the part nobody tells you. That bone deep fatigue you feel on Friday nights isn't always from the work itself. It's from the decision fatigue of living on the edge. You say yes to the overtime shift you're physically rail from, not because you're ambitious, but because saying no feels dangerous. You put off a doctor visit for a nagging pain because the deductible uncertainty feels like a bigger threat than the illness. This mode of thinking isn't a personal failure. You aren't bad at life or weak. Your brain is simply giving you a biological response to fragility. It's hard to think about the next 5 years when you're hyper-aware of the next 5 days. When you live without a buffer, you aren't really living. You're just reacting to the friction. The background apps of anxiety. Even on the days when no bills are due and the car is running, fine. There is a cost to living without a margin. It's a cognitive tax that most of us have paid for so long, we've forgotten what it feels like to be tax-free. Think of your brain like a smartphone. Every time you have to wonder if a check is cleared, or if you should wait until Friday to buy the good detergent, or if that upcoming dental cleaning is going to fit into this month's cash flow, you are opening a mental tab. You're starting a background app that never closes. Even while you're trying to focus on your work or listen to your partner at dinner, those apps are running in the background, draining your battery. This is why you feel exhausted even when you haven't done anything physically demanding. It's the noise floor of your life. For most of us, that noise floor never drops to zero. We are constantly scanning, calculating, and anticipating. The part nobody tells you is that you aren't actually bad at planning. You aren't disorganized or lazy. You're just mentally overloaded. Scarcity has a way of narrowing your attention. It forces you to become an expert on the immediate, at the expense of the important. When your bandwidth is consumed by the now, there is simply no processing power left for the next. The $20,000 switch. When I finally realized what it took to quiet that noise, the answer was almost anticlimactic. It wasn't $1 million. It wasn't a windfall that changed my zip code or my tax bracket. It was $20,000. Now, I want to be very clear. $20,000 is not life-changing money in the way we usually see it on a screen. It's not get-rich money. It won't buy you a house. It won't allow you to retire. And it won't make you the most interesting person in the room. In fact, it's a remarkably boring number. But $20,000 is the point where the switch flips. It is the exact amount of air required to absorb the shocks of a normal American life without the engine stalling. It's the point where $1, 200 transmission repair stops being a crisis and starts being a Saturday morning chore. It's the point where you can stop checking your bank app before you tap your card at the grocery store. This number isn't magic, and it doesn't mean your life becomes perfect. What it means is that the background apps finally close. The noise floor drops. For the first time, your brain has the surplus bandwidth to stop asking, how do I survive this week? And start asking, what do I actually want to do with the next year? You haven't changed your lifestyle. You've just changed the physics of your world. The internal shift. When you hit that $20,000 mark, your life looks identical to the outside observer. You're likely still in the same house, driving the same car, and logging into the same Zoom calls. But the internal shift, the way you actually experience the hours of your day, is a total transformation. The recalibration of risk. One of the most profound changes is how you perceive risk. When you have no margin, everything feels like a gamble. Asking for a raise feels like a high-stakes poker game where you can't afford to lose. Considering a lateral move to a company with better culture feels like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. But with the threshold behind you, you don't suddenly become a reckless hustler. You just stop being terrified. You realize that no is no longer a death sentence. That quiet confidence changes your posture in negotiations and your honesty in meetings. You aren't seeking risk. You've just finally achieved the leverage to handle it. The shrinking of problems. The problems don't go away. The water heater will still leak. The laptop will still catch a virus. The difference is the emotional charge those events carry. When you're below the line, a $500 repair is a heart-pounding crisis that triggers a week of how are we going to fix this. Above the line, it's just an annoyance. Desperation is replaced by a simple delay. You don't have to scramble, you just handle it. By removing the panic, you preserve your energy for things that actually matter. The expansion of the horizon. This is where things get interesting. When you stop worrying about how to pay for next Tuesday, your brain naturally begins to look further out. You stop thinking in 2-week pay cycles. You start thinking in quarters, then in years. You begin to make decisions based on where you want to be in 2030, rather than just trying to make it to the end of the month. You've traded your microscope for a telescope. The emergency fund paradox. We've been taught to call this an emergency fund, which implies that the goal of the money is to be spent when something goes wrong. But there is a paradox at the heart of this threshold. The real power of this money comes from the fact that it exists, not from the fact that you use it. Most people who reach this $20,000 mark rarely actually touch it. Because they have the margin, they make better decisions upstream that prevent emergencies from happening in the first place. They fix the car before it breaks down on the highway. They take the day off when they're feeling sick, instead of working until they collapse. It's not really an emergency fund. It's a permission fund. It's the money that gives you permission to be patient. Permission to be picky about your next job. Permission to stay calm when everyone else is panicking. It works silently, every single day, changing your behavior and your blood pressure without a single dollar ever leaving the account. The mere presence of that Airgap prevents the bad decisions that usually lead to financial ruin. The biological restoration. We like to talk about money as if it's a math problem, but your bank account is actually a biological remote control. When you live without a margin, your body is constantly bathing in cortisol, the stress hormone. This isn't just a feeling, it's a physiological state. Cortisol is designed to save your life from a predator, but it does so by shutting down everything that isn't essential for immediate survival. It kills your creativity, it shreds your patience, and it narrows your vision until all you can see is the next 24 hours. You aren't a short-term thinker because of a personality flaw. You're a short-term thinker because your biology won't let you be anything else. Removing that financial pressure through the $20,000 threshold isn't about motivation. It's about restoration. It's like finally turning off a loud, jarring alarm that's been ringing in the room for a decade. When the noise stops, your brain naturally regains its bandwidth. You become more creative, more strategic, and more patient. Not because you went to a seminar, but because your body finally feels safe enough to stop panicking. The person you become. The deepest change, however, isn't in your biology or your bank balance. It's in your identity. Most of us view saving money as a chore, a series of no's that we have to endure. But building that first milestone is actually the process of proving something to yourself. Every dollar you put into that buffer is a vote for a new version of you. When you finally hit that number, you realize you are no longer the person who just gets by. You have proven that you are capable of restraint, consistency, and long-term planning. You successfully defended your future against your immediate impulses. This new identity starts to spill into every other area of your life. You'll notice it in the way you carry yourself in a meeting. You have better boundaries because you aren't desperate for every scrap of approval. You'll notice it in your personal life. You have less tolerance for draining situations or bad deals because you finally know what it feels like to have a choice. The real transformation isn't that you have $20,000. It's that you've become the kind of person who can have $20,000. Once you've crossed that line, you don't just see your money differently. You see yourself differently. You realize that the most valuable thing you've built isn't the account balance. It's the quiet, unshakable confidence of a person who finally has room to move. The fragility of the high earner. There is a specific kind of American tragedy that happens when someone finally makes it, but forgets to build the Airgap. I've met professionals earning $250,000 a year who are, for all intents and purposes, more fragile than a teacher earning a third of that. Because they've optimized for lifestyle rather than margin, their six-figure income is spoken for before it even hits their account. They've upgraded their cars, their houses, and their expectations, but they are still living in survival mode. If their bonus is delayed by 2 weeks, their entire world starts to wobble. On the other hand, someone with a modest income and a $20,000 buffer is effectively richer in every way that matters to the human brain. They have the resilience that the high earner lacks. Wealth doesn't start with acquisition. It starts with retention. You can't build a structure on a foundation that's constantly being liquidated to pay for last month's mistakes. The person who earns $70,000 but keeps $20,000 in the tank has more power, more peace, and more leverage than the person who earns $200,000 but keeps zero. Optionality, the invisible prize. The most underrated benefit of crossing this threshold is something economists call optionality. Options are a strange thing. They are completely invisible until the moment you don't have them. When you are below the line, you don't have options. You have obligations. You have to take the first job offer that comes your way, even if the culture is toxic. You have to stay in the city that's draining you because you can't afford the security deposit on a new life. But once that $20,000 is locked in, the world starts to offer you gifts. Optionality is the ability to say no to a bad deal so you can be available for a great one. It's the capacity to take 3 months to find the right job instead of panic accepting the first, one that pays the rent. It's the freedom to invest in a certification, or a relocation, or even just a trip to a conference that might change your career trajectory. When you have margin, you aren't just surviving, you're scouting. You have the breathing room to look for the asymmetrical wins, those small investments of time or money that have the potential for massive payoffs. You've moved from a defensive posture to an offensive one, not because you're greedy, but because you finally have the permission to play a longer game. The logic of enough. I want to be very clear about why I keep coming back to this specific range of $20,000. It isn't a number I pulled out of a hat, and it certainly isn't a dream. It's grounded in the practical physics of a typical American life. If you look at the most common disruptions, the transmission that finally gives up, the deductible for an ER visit, the sudden reduction in force at the office, they all have a price tag. $20,000 doesn't make you a millionaire, but it covers almost every normal disaster. It buys you 3 to 6 months of time. This isn't money for a life of luxury. It's money for a life of stability. It's enough to ensure that when life happens, and it will, the engine doesn't stall. It turns a potential catastrophe into a manageable inconvenience. The path of least resistance. When people hear a number like 20,000, the immediate reaction is often a sense of overwhelm. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that figure can feel like it's on the other side of the moon. But the secret to reaching it isn't intensity, it's consistency. It's about starting embarrassingly small, so small that it feels almost pointless. The goal isn't to save money. The goal is to prove to yourself that you are the kind of person who keeps a margin. You don't need a complex 50-step formula or a restrictive budget that makes you miserable. You just need to begin the process of identity shift. You start by reclaiming $5, then $50. You're not just building a balance. You're building the muscle of restraint. Eventually, the momentum takes over, not because you're working harder, but because you've stopped fighting your own impulses. The hidden compound effect. We often talk about compounding in terms of interest rates, but the most powerful compounding happens in your mind. The first $5,000 is the hardest because you're still fighting the old survival identity. But as the buffer grows, your awareness sharpens. You start seeing opportunities to save or earn that were invisible to you when you were panicking. Your confidence begins to compound. You realize that you've survived the first few hurdles without depleting your core. This realization makes the next 5,000 easier, and the 5,000 after that even easier. You aren't just accumulating cash, you're accumulating proof of your own resilience. The quietness of the soul. The most profound effects of this threshold have nothing to do with your bank statement. They show up in the middle of the night. You start to sleep better because your brain isn't running survival math in the dark. You become more patient with your kids or your partner because you aren't carrying a hidden weight of financial dread. The shame that often accompanies money struggles begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. You become more present. When you're at dinner, you're actually at dinner, not half calculating if you should have ordered the cheaper entree. You move through the world with a sense of steady, which is a far more powerful social signal than any luxury watch or car could ever be. The calm after the buzz. Let's go back to that moment at the red light. The phone buzzing in the cup holder with a notification for a $50 renewal. On this side of the line, that buzz doesn't trigger a micro-freeze. Your heart rate doesn't climb. You don't start scanning your mental calendar for the next payday. You see the notification, you acknowledge the expense, and you put the phone back down. The notification is the same. The job might be the same. The city is definitely the same. But the you that is processing that event has fundamentally changed. This was never about becoming rich. It was about becoming steady. It's about creating that air gap so you can finally hear your own thoughts above the noise of survival. The money matters, absolutely. But who you become while building that margin matters so much more. You've moved from a life of reaction to a life of intention. And that quiet is where your real life finally begins.